This is Trunk Nation with Eddie Trunk on Volume, Sirius XM 106.
Talking rock music with you guys live Monday to Friday, 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern here on Trunk Nation, Sirius XM 106 Volume. And we are going to celebrate the birthday of Eddie Van Halen. 844-686-5863. Some Van Halen talk right now from you guys. Here's the question I want to know from you. What do you think, when you consider now that we've only had 3 Van Halen albums in the last 22 years, we're predominantly going to be talking 70s and 80s. But what do you think, and what is your favorite Van Halen album? I know for me that I'm always going to defer to the first album. I will never forget getting that album. Remember, you guys that are older, my age, in that age bracket, back in the day, sounding like an old man here, but back in the day, there were these things called record clubs. The back of the TV guide or the back of a magazine, you could get 10 albums sent to you for like a penny. And then you would be put into this club where you had to buy X amount of records every month for so long to have gotten all those records. So I joined one of those clubs, and one of the first things I ordered back in 78 or whenever it was the first Van Halen album. To say it was a game changer would be stating the obvious. So for me, VH1 and Women and Children would be my top 2. But I am welcoming your calls on your favorite Van Halen albums, your favorite Van Halen memories, maybe the first time you saw Van Halen, and then the sobering realization that in 22 years, the guy's only given us 3 records, and 2 of them can kind of have a little bit of an asterisk next to them. Let's begin our calls. This is Rock, who's listening in Irvine. Hi, Rock. What's going on?
Hey, Ed. How you doing, buddy?
Good.
I can't say one album is the album, but I kind of broke into 4 little things here real quick. I'll give for you. First of all, the world's best Van Halen chord is the beginning of Fools, the A chord he comes into after the little opening. That's number 1.
You really did break this down.
Yeah. Number 2, the world's best single notes. Don't Tell Me What Love Can Do Off Balance. That single note.
I love that song. Alex played that song going into a break in the last hour, and I love that song. It's dark. It's different for Van Halen.
Definitely.
It's on the Balance record. I think I love that song. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. And then as far as speed, I mean, there's nothing that shows his speed more than Spanish Fly. It's still ridiculous. It'll never be matched. And then lastly, top to bottom, I agree with the first album. I can't decide between the first album and Fair Warning, my favorite 2, top to bottom. Any time of the day I could listen to those things, and I'm good.
Wow, Rock, that is some great Van Halen analysis right there. That is a Van Halen fan. Thank you for that. I love Women and Children. I love In a Simple Rhyme. I love some of the deeper tracks on that record. I remember where I was when I got it. I mean, this is how memorable that is. That's 1980. I'm 16, 15, not driving yet. I remember coming from I can't remember my family's birthdays, and that's the truth. But I do remember this. And I remember I came from the dentist. My mom took me to the dentist, and I had a cavity filled. And then we stopped at the record store, and I got Women and Children, and I put it in the car coming home. I mean, that's how vivid that is, right? Let's continue and talk to Jim, who's in Canada. Hi, Jim. You're on Trunk Nation.
Hey, Eddie. How are you?
Good.
Good. Thanks for having me on. I think you nailed it, man. VH1. I can remember, they still exist today, but there used to be a record store in Canada called Record on Wheels. Used to be all the way across Canada, a bit limited now. I can still remember when the store manager dropped the needle on that album, and Running with the Devil came on, and me and my buds looked at each other and said, what is that? I mean, it was just crazy, the sound.
Right, and then you take that from, into Eruption into You Really Got Me, and it's like, forget about it. I mean, the sound, everything about it. I mean, the first record is, you remember that. Thank you, Jim. Your phone's a little noisy. I got to let you go, but thank you for calling. I mean, it's stating the obvious, the game changer that VH1 was, and still is in a lot of ways. You can't go wrong with any of the first 4 records, in my opinion, with Roth. Then to me, we've talked about this before, Diver Down, some great stuff, but obviously a lot of covers, very short record. And then 1984 is as massive as that record is, to me, that was the introduction of the keyboards and things like that a little bit. And then when you look at the Hagar stuff, which I look at as a totally different band, but I also love, to me, 5150, great. For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, great. And then Scattered Things on the others. And like we talked about, Don't Tell Me What Love Can Do on Balance. I love that song. Very dark, very heavy song. Jeff in California. Hey, Jeff, you're on Trunk Nation.
Hey, Eddie, how you doing?
Great.
Good. Hey, 5150. I'm going to go against the grain here. No disrespect to the first, especially the first David Lee Roth Van Halen record. That record is phenomenal. But when Sammy Hagar came into that band, it was something very special for me. The age I was, I remember before computers, before the internet, camping out all night long to get tickets to see them on the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge tour. I'll never forget that. And there are 3 bands that are on my bucket list for reuniting. It would be the original Guns N' Roses, Audioslave, and Sammy Hagar, Eddie Van Halen, Alex Van Halen, and Michael Anthony getting back together, making new music, doing a new tour. I mean, if they announced that, that would be so astronomically huge.
Jeff, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
42.
Okay, so you're 10 years younger than me, so you just... Was 5150 your introduction to Van Halen, or were you aware of them and had the Roth records earlier?
No, I was aware of the Roth records. I was very much into the Roth records because of people that were older than me and taught me about real music as a really young kid. I was very lucky to have that influence, yeah.
See, I'm with you. I'm with you on Sammy. Thank you, Jeff. I got to run. I got a break coming up here. But I'll say this. I was a big Sammy Hagar fan before he was in Van Halen. And here on the East Coast, Sammy will tell you this himself, he was always a weak draw on the East Coast. Sammy would do great in the Midwest. He'd come to the East Coast, New York area, couldn't get arrested. It was always like that for him here for whatever reason. But I was a fan from Montrose to all the solo stuff. I was more than excited when it was announced Sammy was going to sing in Van Halen because I was already a fan. I knew the guy had a tremendous voice. And honestly, by that point, I had enough of David Lee Roth because I would go to these shows when Roth was in the band and I'd watch him swing a sword around for 10 minutes, do a dance with scarves for 10 minutes, walk out to the crowd, hold his arms out in like a Jesus pose for like 10 minutes, just let the crowd applaud. I know that was all his posturing stuff, but all I could ever think of while that stuff was going on is I could be hearing 3 more songs right now. So I was kind of over his whole shtick at that point and really welcomed Sammy into that band and was excited about it because I thought that the whole thing had run its course a little bit at that time with a lot of the Roth antics. But I'll never argue that the first 4 Van Halen records, top to bottom, are the untouchable records in their entire catalog. Let's take a break. We'll come back. A lot of great calls coming in. We'll continue talking Van Halen and rock music with you for the remainder of the hour on Trunk Nation, Sirius XM 106 volume.
This is Trunk Nation with Eddie Trunk on volume Sirius XM 106.
Back live with you on this Thursday, Trunk Nation, Sirius XM 106 volume, open phones. We are talking with you guys about Van Halen a little bit because it is Eddie Van Halen's 62nd birthday. Let's see. Let's talk to Kevin in Toronto. You're up next, Kev. What's going on?
Pleasure to talk to you today, Eddie.
Thank you, Kevin.
First LP I ever bought, I was probably 12 years old. Van Halen, Fair Warning. We moved on to cassettes. Would have been Women and Children First, the first cassette I ever bought. The first CD I ever bought, Van Halen 2. Now, let's flash back to 1998. Eddie brings in Gary, his Mach 3 version, for lack of a better term. And if you go to old videos and stuff like that, he's saying in his mind the best version of Van Halen.
Right, as everybody says when they're selling something new.
Exactly. So from 78 to 98, he spent 20 years, one of the biggest bands in the world, used to all that attention and notoriety and whatnot. 98 comes along, his quote-unquote, his best version of the band. All his diehards and everyone, they kind of, as you know, peter away, let's say, not big supporting behind that outing. So put on your psychological hat, maybe. What do you think their potential is for that to have affected him on a personal, psychological, musical, inspirational level?
Hey, good, very valid points, Kevin, because you are right. Even Van Halen, who would be considered to be sort of bulletproof when it comes to selling tickets and selling records, definitely got hit with Van Halen 3. It was definitely a backlash to that record. And I'll tell you this, one of the reasons why I know that so vividly, and thank you, Kevin, for your call, is because I mentioned earlier, I did interview Eddie Van Halen one time. It was on the phone. It was on the radio when I was working in radio in New Jersey at the time. And the interview happened because Van Halen were playing the Garden the next night, Madison Square Garden, and tickets were soft. The show was not sold out. And that's kind of unheard of, right, for Van Halen. And we got a call. The radio station I was working at the time, DHA, got a call from whether it be the promoter or somebody in the marketing department, said, hey, can we get Eddie Van Halen on? We want to try to push some tickets and try to get this show sold out or sell some extra tickets. And I happened to be on the air and did the interview. It was on the phone. I talked to him for about 20 minutes. I got to find the tape somewhere. But yes, the line being sold at that time was very much that was the ultimate version of Van Halen. And we had a great conversation on the phone. And Eddie Van Halen, I'll never forget this, and this is how I met him. He invited me to the show over the air. And a lot of times people say that, and especially back then, because I was not nearly as well known back then in the business, but sometimes people say that and it's kind of a thing, but it doesn't really transpire. But I was like, yeah, I got tickets. I'm going to come, because I had planned on going anyway. And he said, well, I want to meet you. I'm going to leave you some passes to come back and say hi. So I didn't know if that was actually going to happen. And I went to the show, and there were passes left for me. And I got in my seats, which were like 5 rows from the stage. And I'm there, and the opening act was playing. And somebody came out and grabbed me and said, you're Eddie Trunk. I said, yeah. They said, Eddie Van Halen wants to meet you. And I was, son of a gun. Okay. Because sometimes you can be left passes, but they're just sort of token passes. They don't really mean anything or have any access. They're just, after show. It's like there's not a lot of juice to that pass. It can make you feel like you got something, but it's somewhat meaningless. But I went back there, and I will never forget it. Went into the tuning room. Eddie was there noodling and tuning up on his guitar. Introduced myself. He's like, hey, man, we had a great conversation. And it's like, I enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for coming out. And I was like, cool, yeah. Thanks for taking the time to say hello. And I mean, this was still in the days where not everybody was running around with the phone in their pocket. Obviously, there wasn't social media stuff happening at that point. So I was kind of unprepared for it, and as a result, I never even had a picture. I don't even have a picture of that moment. But I'll never forget it. And then we were talking for like 10 minutes, just him in his tuning room, and someone else came in and started talking to him, and I don't like to overstay my welcome, and I said, I appreciate you taking the time, Eddie, and have a great show, and hope we can talk again. And that was the last time I talked to the guy. And I'm sure he doesn't remember it or anything like that, but ever since, it's been the elusive interview. Listen, the bottom line here in all of this, Eddie Van Halen, a legend, one of the all-time greats, and stating the obvious, we wish him a very happy 62nd birthday. Thank you guys for all the calls. Open phones the entire show tomorrow for a free-for-all Friday. I'll talk to you then live at 2 p.m. Eastern on Trunk Nation, Sirius XM 106 Volume.